Now, this Tuesday marks exactly 2 years since the US Army completed its chaotic exit from Afghanistan. The pullout heralded the return to power of the very same militants the Americans pushed out in 2001, the Taliban. Now, 2 years into the new Taliban regime, the situation for Afghans, particularly Afghan women, is dire. The UN has branded the mode of governing there a gender apartheid. To tell us a bit more about the impact of these restrictions on Afghan women and perhaps what the international community should now do, I'm very pleased to be joined by Heather Barr. She's the Associate Women's Rights Director at Human Rights Watch. Welcome to the programme, and thanks very much indeed for finding the time to speak to us today.
Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for covering this topic.
I want to ask you, first of all, about just the latest restrictions on women's life in Afghanistan. It was only 2 days ago that the Taliban banned women from visiting a really popular park in the country. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think this is an illustration of the fact that we have no idea where these restrictions will end, and they are ongoing and escalating in some ways. The ban on women visiting the park, I think, is really important because, it gives you the feeling that the Taliban are actually engaging in intentional cruelty. They're not satisfied with just banning women from education and employment, but they want to take away other things like parks and sports, and they've closed all the beauty salons about a month ago. So just things that make you feel human. And another thing that's happened recently that we should talk about also is last week, the Taliban blocked 63 women from getting on airplanes when they were meant to be leaving to go to the United Arab Emirates to take up scholarships there. And this is really devastating because one of the things that has been sort of helping some girls and young women cling to hope is the idea that they might be able to go overseas and study. And now the Taliban seem determined to take away even that.
Indeed, public space for women in Afghanistan clearly shrinking, and there are unofficial figures out recently that do point to a real sort of mental health crisis for women in the country, reports suggesting that more women are taking their own life or trying to than they've done before in Afghanistan. I know that's something you've looked into a little bit. What do you know? What does the data tell us for the moment?
So these reports have been emerging for many months now, but there's a particularly important set of research that's just come out, done by an Afghan media organization called Zan Times. And what they find is exactly what you've said, that, there's evidence that more and more women and girls are trying to commit suicide or are dying by suicide. And I think that that's unfortunately not surprising at all when you think about how challenging it is to get up in the morning and go on in a situation where you've lost your independence, you've lost perhaps your livelihood, your social networks, your dreams for the future, and the walls keep closing in even further on you every day.
Since the Taliban swept back into power 2 years ago, no country has formally recognised their rule. But I wonder what your thoughts are on that, because there is a school of thought that says actually the only way to affect change, to improve lives for women in Afghanistan, is to speak to the Taliban, that you need that relationship, even if you disagree with their ideology. What do you think of that?
Well, the question I've heard a lot of Afghan women ask is, what has this engagement so far achieved? There's been an enormous amount of engagement with the Taliban over the last 2 years. Many diplomats going to them and saying, look, these policies on women are not acceptable. You need to stop this. You're not going to gain recognition if you behave in this way. And the result of that is nothing. There's been no evidence at all that the Taliban are listening, that they're willing to compromise at all. And so, I think Afghan women are rightly asking, are you not just actually normalizing them through these kinds of engagements and making them seem legitimate and even recognized in an informal way? I mean, one of the things that we want to look for is a stronger focus on accountability. At the Human Rights Council in September, we'll be asking again, as we have been for several years, for a new UN-mandated accountability mechanism to collect and preserve evidence that can be used for prosecution of crimes being committed in Afghanistan. We're also looking to the International Criminal Court for action on Afghanistan, including on their crimes against women and girls. So I think it's time for talking about how these are crimes and they do need to be punished.
And just a final thought from you, if we can, on what the international response should be, particularly in terms of people who want to leave Afghanistan. It's often very difficult for Afghans to safely reach Europe, certainly to reach the United States. Do Western countries need to do far more, particularly given historic Western involvement in Afghanistan, to help people get out now?
So Western countries, all countries need to be doing much more, certainly to accept asylum seekers, including women and girls. There are 3 countries, Finland, Denmark, and Sweden, that have said that they have policies that they will accept all asylum claims from Afghan women and girls. More countries should follow, but there's a need to do more in addition to accepting asylum seekers. There's been a real lack of leadership in terms of the international response to the women's rights crisis, and we are looking to countries that say that they have a feminist foreign policy, like France, to provide that leadership, which is still missing so far.
Heather Barr, Associate Women's Rights Director at Human Rights Watch, thank you very much indeed for coming in to talk to us here today on France 24.
Thank you.